I hope you girls aren't eating the food at that place, if you can even call it that.
Honey.
I'm serious. If you're going to be a waitress your whole life, the least you can do is get a job at a real restaurant so I can eat there.
I like the Caesar and the flags.
I'm just saying. You're going to have to figure this thing out pretty soon, kiddo. Because your college fund is almost gone and I can't keep bailing you out.
I have a career path, Dad.
You do?
Kelsey Grammer, welcome to Bullseye. I'm really happy to have you on the show. It's nice to meet you.
Likewise, thank you.
You have a really excellent singing about pizza dough introduction.
Yes.
In this film.
Yes. This was the crux of actually getting the job. I mean, Julia and I did a movie together about 5 years ago called The God Committee, which was a very sort of sad look into harvesting organs grown in pigs for human heart replacement, stuff like that. And this guy who's sort of on the cutting edge of it, who's pretty much researching his own life-saving technique, hopefully. He doesn't quite make it. And it's a very sad movie, and they have a child. And it's quite extraordinarily sad. It was shot at a time when it was sad for everyone. We were doing lockdown at the time. But during our filming, I would go around singing the songs from Man of La Mancha because I was about to go and do that in London. And Julia said, oh, she logged something away and then called me when she put this thing together finally and said, I want you to come just play the father and I want you to sing like you did on the set. So that's where it all came from.
She's like, I know you're capable of embarrassing yourself.
Yeah, right. You could go full hog, right? Yeah.
I've seen it.
So, and I actually prepared Italian art songs. Nascoso in mio sol, stuff like that. And then she said, I'm afraid that the licensing will cost us too much money. And of course, it's 400 years old. But anyway, I just did some gibberish.
Yeah, you ended
Italian
up basically
nonsense.
saying like, "Mi make a pizza."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Pretty awful. But I thought she did it very well. She handled it. She helmed it very well. She wrote the script. I mean, it's obviously it was a book. As I understand, it was a very successful novel. And I wish it well,
Do you sing in your day-to-day life? I mean, casually?
I do. I pretty much sing all the time. Yeah, it's a pastime for me. I mean, I really do love singing. And I don't focus on it like I should. When I was a young man, I started, when I was 14, a guy came into our 8th grade class and said, I want every boy in here to come and audition for me. We're going to start a choir. And his name was Richard Mitten, and we all said, yeah, right. And yet, somehow we all showed up there that afternoon, and that's when I began singing. And he said, you're a bass baritone, and fortunately, I had played the trombone when I was younger, so I knew how to read the bass clef, so I became kind of a fixture in the choir. I could, be a good foundational voice for him.
I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but in a choir of 14-year-olds, bass baritone is a valuable,
it's a standout, right?
Yeah.
So I had a voice teacher who said
you don't have to hit much to be a catcher.
Exactly,
you know what I mean?
Right, exactly, yeah. So I a voice teacher who wanted me to go into opera, and I thought, it's just I don't have the discipline, and I'm fairly disciplined, but I don't have the discipline for that. So I thought acting would be a better idea. I think I was probably right.
Were you embarrassed about singing? I mean, I feel like
no.
That's an easy thing to be embarrassed about.
It could have been, yeah. I mean, my 12-year-old daughter now is a little bit shy when she sang a Christmas song for our party this year, but I think she'll grow out of it. But no, it was a good group of kids growing up. I was a pretty fortunate guy, and we all sang. I mean, he had built like 10 different choirs and went on the road all the time, did all sorts of stuff. It was very productive. So.
Is it different acting for an actor? Your director in this film is a wonderful actor.
Yeah, I always value direction that comes from someone who's also acted. Yeah, I mean it seems to be more specific and helpful. Film is obviously the director's medium. You get the final say. On the stage. The actor basically has the final say because it's in that moment, the organic execution of the role is with them. so it's live. In film, of course, that's the director gets to do whatever they want to with your performance, and she's very good. She gave some nice notes, and she said, "Don't sing that Italian art song."
Are you the kind of actor who feels comfortable being a aesthetic pawn for a director? I mean, like there are directors for whom, it's very important to compose the shot for a director,
right?
Yeah. And that can involve really technical specifics in terms of how you move your body, where you move your body,
right,
and so on and so forth. Is that something
that's a reasonable
is comfortable
question?
For you?
Yeah, I'm fine pretty much as long as I understand what a director wants. I can accomplish pretty much anything that's needed. Mostly, I find though that, and this is something I found in auditioning people as well. When you walk into a room with an idea about a character, and you're the actor, the people on the other side of the table are actually looking for you to solve their problem, which is they don't know what to do with the role. So they're hoping you're going to show them. And when you find that actor who walks in and says, "I got a way to play this guy," that's usually what you sort of cling to and are drawn to. So very few guys have a very specific way they want things to sound or a very specific way they want things to look. The most specific part I ever had to do was in a play, which was interesting because of the lighting design. The lighting design was so specific. Like there were about 18 pin spots, and if you missed your mark, you weren't in the light. So it was a very, very fascinating opening. So opening on the Heath, it was a Hamlet production. I was playing Laertes, but if you didn't hit the light, you were done. You weren't seen.
Were there literal marks? Like
absolutely,
what?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're highlighted, and they would like if they were.
So you
like,
didn't just have to intuit
no,
it.
They're like reflective tape.
Right.
They shine light on before you start the show. But you could easily miss them. There was like 5 or 6 people running around on the Heath, So
I want to ask you a little bit about your childhood. You lived in a few different places as a kid. You were born in the Virgin Islands, started living in the Virgin Islands, lived in New Jersey, right? And then spent your teenage years in Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale isn't the number one place where show business careers start.
Interesting.
It's a place where a lot of surfing careers start.
Bartending
careers.
Water stuff, restaurant, bartending. Yeah, there is a lot of drinking that goes on there. It's tropical. I mean, it's like you don't want to wear clothing, basically. Everybody is sun-kissed. Everybody looks fantastic.
You were a surfer, right?
I was a surfer. And when I finally I was invited to act in a play by a fellow that showed up in 11th grade. And I thought, this is okay. This I could do. And I actually thought, this is like surfing. This is just like surfing. You're on a big wave. You got to ride it. You got to ride it good. You got to make sure you don't fall off. You got to keep up. There's a kind of an energy about it, and there's a kind of spontaneity about it that's in the moment. The language is always different, especially with a live audience. No matter what's going on, the performance you're giving this night is not the same one you gave the night before, even though you have a kind of structure that you'll honor. But it's an organic, living, breathing thing, just like riding a wave. And so that to me was the hook.
You must have been like in school the reader aloud in class guy.
Yeah.
Like
where I really was in Sunday school.
Oh, yeah.
When I was a little boy, we went to the Plainfield First Church of Christ Scientist. I was raised as a Christian Scientist. And when it came time to read aloud from the Bible, King James Version rather, I was over the moon about it. I discovered my love of language from that Bible, and it just always turned me on. Language just excited me. The words as they were. Of course, a lot of it was archaic, but there was a majesty to the language, the pictures they would summon up, and I thought, this is something I really, really respond to. So I always read aloud.
It's also exciting to be good at it.
Yeah, well, you discover a thing, right? You discover that thing that you realize, oh my goodness, that turn of a phrase or that diphthong or that set of consonants, that makes that thing pop. And that was It was joyful for me, yeah.
I'm excited to hear about the surfing piece of it and the connection that you made as a kid between acting and surfing, because I think that the thing that could be missing from a teenager's approach to acting who is the good talking person, and it's possible that I went to an acting high school and I know this from experience as the good talking person, is that when you're the good talking person, it can be very hard to also be the super present in the moment person.
Right,
that
got
acting
it.
requires.
Very interesting. That's a very interesting thing. It's a good question, thoughtful question. My name is Grammer. So I took a lot of heat about, proper English usage when I was a boy. So I was accustomed to being the kid that needed to speak well. And so it was sort of an automatic pilot thing for me once I was in high school. I think some people were a little bit surprised by it because I was also a surfer. I mean, that is really what I did. And so I kind of was a visitor at high school until I started doing that play thing. And then sort of things just blossomed a little bit. I will say this parenthetically. The high school I went to in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, it's called Pinecrest Preparatory School. Someone else who's very famous now went there, Ariana Grande. So I guess maybe Fort Lauderdale has a few things going for it.
Sure, no. I've been to Fort Lauderdale. It's very nice. I'm not here to put down Fort Lauderdale. I'm just saying you didn't go to Hollywood High.
No, I sure didn't. Yeah, no. And it never entered my mind to be an actor until that play. And that's when I discovered it. I just thought, oh, this is for me.
But you truly discovered it. I mean, when it was time to apply to college, you applied to Juilliard
and Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I decided this is worth pursuing at that time. And of course, then they threw me out of Juilliard. It's okay.
Your mom had been a dancer at some point,
singer,
right?
musician. She was a showgirl. I mean, she did the summer stock. I have pictures of her still breaking down the tent with a group of young, plucky actors. It's very cute.
So did she think it was cool that you were doing this
she
stuff?
thought it was very cool. Yeah. Let me think what year it was. Was it 1980, maybe 1981? I was in the Philip Anglin production of Macbeth. Halfway through the second performance, Philip decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And I was understudying him, so I went on. My mom flew up the next day and came to the next performance of it. And she was so proud. It was really wonderful.
What did your grandparents think of it, your mom's parents?
My grandmother was a little bit iffy about it. She wanted me to be a football player and, thought that the whole thing was a little ridiculous. But
she wanted you to be a football player?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was okay at it.
You're pretty big.
I was pretty big, but I wasn't, not as big as they are today. I mean, the kids playing football today, I think, oh, good Lord.
But it's all all I got to say is when you said, my grandma wanted me to be I thought you were going to say lawyer.
No,
accountant.
All she ever really got to was football. She figured I'd find a way to make a living. But when my grandmother's presence was most, obvious during my early teens, and from like 10 to 18. Once I got into Juilliard, she was kind of thrilled with that, but she didn't think I'd ever make a living. So she was basically right for a few years. But then I called her one day. I guess it was 1980. No, early that was 1976. Yeah, I called her in 76 and I said, Gam, I got some news. She said, you got an acting job. I said, yes, I did. And she said, well, it's about time. So she was an irascible character, but she was full of love for her family and for her grandchildren. And she was an amazing woman that way.
How old were you when you lost your grandfather?
12. Yeah, we moved to Florida and then he died. He died a week later. It was really threw us all off. I mean, the whole family was, just shocked by it. Whether he knew it or not, we still don't really have a real understanding of that. But he died of cancer a week after we arrived, and so it was quite mind-numbing for the next year or so to just kind of put one foot in front of the other. But we all did it, made it. And Gam was pretty strong through it. But, she missed her guy. They were close. And I missed him. He was my whole life. But we got through it.
I mean, sometimes I talk to like an actor whose parents were in the military. They were a military brat and they lived in lots of different places. It's a really common thing that I hear from performers and especially actors that they lived in different places.
Yeah.
I think it teaches you to how to present yourself, basically.
Yeah. And
it also is lonely.
Yeah. And life experience. You become a watcher of life, I think, a little bit more when you're a bit at odds with your location where you think you belong or don't belong. You're looking for that place. And if you find acting, it's like, well, I belong there. I belong that because that's everything. That's human experience. I can parrot human experience. I can absorb it and then release it through a performance. It's a real therapeutic way to live a life, especially if you feel a bit like an orphan.
And I mean, that's like a series of dislocations in your life that you started in the Virgin Islands with your father around. You moved with your mother to New Jersey where you were largely raised by your grandparents. Then the three of you moved to Florida and your grandfather immediately died.
Gone, yeah.
Like those are dislocations that I can barely wrap my head around.
It was very challenging. But you don't, it's like you do what's given unto you, you got to get up. You got to get up in the morning and get on with it.
Did you feel like you were supported through this?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. No. My grandmother was tough. She said, well, get up, cut it out, play football. My mom was pretty understanding, but I became, and my sister was there too, but I became the kind of titular head of the family in a strange way. Way underqualified, but for want of a better reason, I was the only guy there. So that's where they gravitated. There's an energy about it. And they needed me, I needed them. And we forged a path. We forged a weird kind of family dynamic out of that. And it turned out to be pretty successful in a weird way. But, things have a way of falling apart. Tragedies visit us through life. And how you deal with them is, I guess, the mark of your character. I mean, I had a very serious problem for a long time, kind of cursing myself for surviving. And I got through it. But I definitely toyed with the edge for a while.
I mean, it's a big deal to be asked, even through necessity, to have adult capacities when you're...
Yeah. So you fake it. You just put it on. Yeah. It was okay. It's funny. I've said to somebody just recently, I said, I never really said the word dad until I was one, which was fascinating. I mean, I was called my grandfather Gordon, but he was clearly my dad during that time in my life. So to lose him was hard. And then to try to step into his shoes, I didn't quite have, the model yet because I was still just a little too young. But, we did okay.
I mean, I was thinking of, you've done a lot of work with veterans in the last few years and supporting sort of mental health rehabilitation for veterans. And, I was thinking of my own father was a veteran who struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sure.
And I think of the people that he connected with really well in vets groups, in AA, and these different places. And it was other people who really understood trauma.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it makes sense that your sympathies would go there because, we mentioned these moves. Your father was also murdered when you were a very young man. Then not very long afterwards, your sister was murdered.
Yeah.
And not long after that, your two half brothers died in an accident. Yeah. And like that kind of trauma is something that you say, you say we all have tragedy in our life, which is very much true. But also some of us have more difficult times.
Yeah, a little sort of front-loaded. Yeah. it's funny. I did this thing a while ago, just a year ago, last November, called Operation Restored Warrior. And it's they host this thing called a drop zone where you have you and maybe 6 or 7 other guys who are actually real kinetic warriors who are having a problem, adjusting and stuff like that. And they do a lot of Bible study, which is fascinating. And of course, that was right up my alley. I was invited only because a friend who helps fund them said, you know what, they'd like you to come. And I found it to be extraordinary work about how to kind of rehabilitate the warrior mind into an understanding of what it is to be a warrior and to forgive yourself about it. And that was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary thing to participate, feeling as though I was on the outside of that, and then to realize that, my story, bears some attention. And that was a remarkable event for me. We spent, 6 days together. It's morning, noon, and night. 3 meals a day. Somebody's there cooking. And you are isolated with these men who are finding faith again and a purpose for living. And it's a really fascinating thing.
Did you get support from church when you were a teenager?
I had a very interesting relationship with church at the time because the same guy that walked in and said, sing, after he realized I actually could sing pretty well, he started to pay me to go to be a soloist at different churches where he was a choir director as well on Sundays. So I'd get $50 a Sunday, which was pretty remarkable. And I'd go to 2 services a day, but different churches. And that was fascinating to me because I had my sort of on the job training about what, a Methodist was or an Episcopalian or a more fundamentalist church. There were several of them we went to, and I'd sing. It was a marvelous way to sort of spend my time because I got a great sense of what faith was to these people. I didn't necessarily join into that part of it, but the spectacle of it and the respect I earned for the people, the sincerity in these people, and the true love of it. I mean, that Jesus thing is pretty interesting. That I come to heal the brokenhearted is fascinating, and to put it in context, a couple of thousand years later, when you look back and realize that into a time of warfare and infanticide and horrible executions, and the King of Kings was born into that and came to save the world, to save the brokenhearted as a baby. It's a pretty powerful thing. So I understood it in a way that I didn't really connect with until I did the Warrior program thing.
I mean, I'll tell you, I read an interview earlier today where you said, I've always wanted to be a person who lived life to the fullest. And when I read that, I thought, I'm dollars to donuts. What he is feeling is, I have always been a person who is constantly staring at death.
Yeah, that is true. That is true, yeah. What is it? The Spencer poem. It's, ever I hear time's winged chariot at my back.
When did you start drinking? How old were you when you started drinking?
Well, when I grew up, grabbing a beer for the road was not a big thing. That was, my grandmother would even say, oh, grab a beer for the road, Kelsey, on the way out the door. So I was 16, 17, I'd have a beer or two. The heavy drinking didn't really start until after I was on Cheers. That was, I'd party once in a while or have a night with a pal from, high school or whatever who came up to visit in New York. But I was making good money. Cocaine had come into the equation, and drinking just seemed like the easiest thing in the world to do. And it did push away the feelings that maybe I didn't deserve to be there. That's really what I was wrestling with. And then a great old alcoholic named Ted years ago said, oh God, now I'm forgetting what he said. But, oh yeah. Said alcoholism and addiction is basically the result of unresolved grief. That fits it for me. So I've had a real blessing of being able to resolve a lot of it. And that's been a good thing. And to forgive myself.
I'll tell you about Cheers. I've watched Cheers a lot lately, and you're so spectacularly good on it. And I really mean that. I read this like oral history of Cheers that was maybe in the Ringer or something like that. And there was near unanimity among cast and crew interviewed for this piece on, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, especially later on in Cheers, you would be on set. You would appear to be too drunk, high, or both to work, to the point where they were worried were safe.
Right.
Then you literally they would say when the camera was on you, not even when the scene was running, but when you were on camera in the scene, you would deliver perfectly. The camera would be off and you would literally collapse in slide down into a pool of your own illness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I was
what was wild is everybody agreed on this.
I pretty much
their awe at how good you were
was on
at it.
when I was on. Yeah,
yeah,
right, yeah. Funny. It was a good time for me in a lot of ways. It was important to go that far down to get back up.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah. I look back at it all with great gratitude at this point in my life.
You wouldn't do it a different way?
Didn't occur to me. There was to go back in any kind of shame or regret about it would be counterproductive anyway. And I was always good
on screen for sure.
That's all I had. That's all I had. That's what I stuck with. That was my strength. I always showed up for work. I was a workaholic. Even if I was loaded or looked like I'd been out having a great night the night before, which was probably true. My obligation was to show up and do it anyway. So, yeah.
Did you know at the time how messed up you were?
No, I like to look back on it and say because I'm a Christian Scientist, so I always like to say that I was in the midst of a powerful healing, and that's where I place my perspective on it. There was a time I was probably trying to kill myself without really wanting to, but that I just thought, how far can I go? And I went pretty far, and I came back. So it's like I don't want to over. What's the word? I don't know if lionize is the right word to use.
Mythologize.
It just was. That was the course I was on, and I once again put one foot in front of the other, day to day, one step at a time, and I never stopped stepping, and that's how it was.
I mean, when I read about this, and I admired your performances so much, one thing I was struck by is the apparent length that you would go to, or a commitment that you had to work, right? To your responsibilities to the other performers and the other creative people on this television show, which as an actor is everything. Can you trust the other performers to do what they're supposed to do, to hold up their end of the tent, But I also thought, was that just at the expense of all of the rest of his life, right? Because I imagine you were imagining yourself to be like a solo pillar without responsibilities to others because you were responsible to yourself,
right? Okay,
when you weren't on stage.
Well, I had a daughter, my daughter Spencer, and I had her every other weekend, and I was pretty clean during those times. Sometimes I still drank in the evening, but during those times we'd go take a trip, or we went to Africa together. I didn't party during the trip to Africa. I did some jobs in the summertime with Robert Halmy, Hallmark Entertainment. Those were great. A lot of travel there. I usually took my daughter then. So there was a kind of a mixture of sober, creative parenting and the wild man who was, seething underneath. I don't look on these times as being bad times for me. They were indulgences to me that actually were powerful learning opportunities for learning about myself and my own capabilities and how far I could go with certain things. I was pretty fearless. I would try almost anything. Physically,
What did you try?
Well, no, just in terms of, being in a situation where if something happened, like if, let's say, for instance, there was a girl who stepped out of a bar in New York on one of these occasions and a guy punched her. So I went out and I started fighting with the guy. So, there's just things like that I thought were the right thing to do. There was another time I was walking down the street and a young lady leaped out of a Cadillac and this guy jumped out at the other side and she was running away and he stopped her and he said, come with me right now or else. And he started to smack her and I said, excuse me, touch her again. I'm going to come over and kill you. And I was wearing a pair of sort of clam digger pants that had sea anemones on them. So I looked like a real cartoon, but I meant it, and he sensed that, and he just got in the car and said, you're not worth it anyway to the girl. I took her and bought her a cup of coffee, and she ended up being sort of a friend for a while, that just said, thank you for that. And I said, well, you didn't have to get in a position where this guy was going to pull that on you. I mean, so, I was trying to do the world some good anyway.
I can see those things very well because not to armchair analyze, but I'm sure you bore a lot of weight about your sister being murdered.
Yeah.
And here is a way to both reenact that danger with you as the hero and also be self-destructive.
Yeah, right. In the process, yeah.
Yeah.
Have no personal regard, yeah, for my own safety, yeah. But something was watching over me. And I finally said, okay. I hear you. So that's been good.
Frasier wasn't originally going to be Frasier. You had planned, a show starring you with some of the writers from Cheers.
Right.
But it wasn't originally going to be a Frasier show.
Right.
Did you think initially that it shouldn't be a Frasier show because it was, you'd been Frasier for a decade or whatever?
I thought it was time to let Frasier go. Yeah. I thought it was time to let him go.
And I mean, to be honest, Kelty, it probably was.
Yeah.
It somehow worked.
Right.
But even now, looking back, I'm not sure.
Maybe I should have done something else. Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it was probably a bad idea.
Yeah, he was a very interesting character to take into another world. And what was fascinating, though, is we went down the road of another script and of another character, a character who was a guy who rode a motorcycle, who was a little bit crazy, who ran an investment firm that was wildly successful, but it had a motorcycle accident. So a pilot, we meet that character in a bed where he has to stay for the first season of the show. And he's surrounded by 3 or 4 people who help him, who like his gal Friday or whatever, or guy Friday, it wouldn't have mattered. Somebody who helps run the industry while he's bedridden, and his nurse and and maybe staff. And they wrote a script that I thought was pretty funny. And we gave that to John Pike, who was the then president of Paramount Television. And he called me up and said, I read the script. Let's go to dinner. So we went to dinner at one of those famous places out in Brentwood, and with the red leather booths and stuff, and sat down, ordered a drink. We sat and talked a little bit, and he said, Kelsey, I think a sitcom should be funny. And that's when I said, oh, all right. So he didn't think much of the script. He said, honestly, I want you to play Frasier. So I said, well, it's possible. He just can't be married anymore, and he can't have a kid. And I said, and he has a kid, so we have to at least make sure he's an honorable dad, but he's got to be some distance from the child, because if you've got a sitcom, and this was something I'd always observed, if you've got a sitcom with a child on it, the child is the most interesting thing, because they grow up on the show. I mean, a 6-year-old 3 years later is a 9-year-old. A 9-year-old 3 years after that, if it's a successful show, is fully in the full bloom of a boy or young woman of puberty, and they are the most interesting thing in the room. They just are. That's just the way things go. And I said,
You're
I'm not
also
going to do that.
beholden to, a talented acting 6-year-old is different from a talented acting 10-year-old or a
Yeah, it
talented
certainly
acting
is.
16-year-old.
Things just change. And I just thought, well, we're not going to do that. And he said, okay, great.
So you decided to get an unspeakably adorable dog instead.
Well, that was the thing we had to deal with. that was a curse from the writers, I guess. I don't know.
Down, Eddie, down. I said down. Good boy, Eddie. Just get down. Good. Eddie, get down. Get down! Dad! I can't read my paper. Eddie's staring at me.
Well, you do make quite a picture in the morning. Just ignore him.
I'm trying to.
I'm talking to the dog.
To my mind, one of the defining characteristics of Frasier as a character is loneliness. That he is, for a character who is introduced to Cheers as a love interest.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? For a character who was the center of a family on a TV show for 10 years, he's so separate from everything around him and desperately wants to be in
Right.
it.
Okay. I don't think so. I think you're wrong. But my defining characteristic for him is love. That he loves so deeply that it almost harpoons him half the time because he won't accept less. He's a perfectionist in that context and has longed for something that may be unachievable, but he's still trying. He doesn't quit. He never did quit. He doesn't feel like he's on the outside of anything. He's just looking for the right one. And I love that about him because when I first read the sides for Frasier, the original, when I first joined the show and was in love with Diane, I said to my buddy Stan, I said, Stan, you know what the key to this guy is? He's in love for the first time in his life with this woman, completely, deeply, completely, irretrievably in love. And that to me defined him for the rest of his life. I mean, the life of Frasier has always been about achieving love. You can look at it as longing for something that he'll never get, but it's not that. He's an optimist. He gets up in the morning, still dresses, still puts his best face out there because he loves being alive, and that's kind of my story.
Hi, welcome to the timber mill.
You don't have a table for 3, do you?
Sure, right this way. Is this your first visit to the timber mill?
Yes.
Well, we've got a dress code.
Well, couldn't you make an exception in this case? His suit was at the cleaners.
Not him, you.
My tie! She cut off my tie!
Gotcha, isn't that great?
Well, why did she cut off my tie?
Well, they've been doing it for years. They like to keep the place casual.
Dad, you could have mentioned that to us.
Well, and spoil the fun? Cheer up. You get a free dessert.
Oh, boy.
Do you like being funny?
Yeah. I liked being funny when I was a boy. I used to make my mom laugh. That's where I first learned to do it because, there wasn't a lot to laugh at back then. But I used to be able to get a good laugh out of her. And that was, that's where I sort of honed it, I suppose. A sort of a laconic approach to life. A little bit over-seasoned, a little bit wise, and a little bit wisecracker. So,
Did you think that would be part of your acting career?
no.
It's not something that's
No.
encouraged in acting school.
No,
generally.
certainly not. No. Yeah, glibness. They don't really care for that. But it just ended up being who I am. So, and the more you trust who you are as part of what will be interesting to watch, the more it comes out, So Frasier became, a little bit of a campy, funny, self-effacing mystery.
I think that it is incredible to say this, but Frasier might not be your most beloved, universally beloved character. I think that's probably Sideshow
It
Bob.
probably is, yeah.
Any last requests?
Well, there is one, but... Nah.
No, go on.
Well, you have such a beautiful voice.
Guilty as charged.
Uh-huh. Anyway, I was wondering if you could sing the entire score of the HMS Pinafore.
Very well, Bart. I shall send you to heaven before I send you to hell. And a 2, and a 3, and we sail the ocean blue, and our saucy ships of beauty. We are sober men and true, and attentive to our duty.
Sideshow Bob does capture what's terrifying about you.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Yeah. Die, Bart, die.
I watched on YouTube a compilation of Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes. Sideshow Bob makes a very particular sound when he steps on a rake.
Yes, the famous rumble. Yeah.
Is that a sound? I found myself wondering, is that a sound that you do each time you go in? Or is there like a piece of archival tape?
I'm not sure. I mean, I usually always record it if we do it again. But they may be opting for the original. I don't really know because I mean it's funny to just have it be exactly the same, honestly. And so if it were I editing it, I'd probably just go with the original. But it's a wonderful character, and I've told this story before. But when I was doing some pickup work for an actor named Ellis Rabb, who had started a theater company called APA, and they'd had great success, and then it went away, and then they started it up again. That was when I came into the scene, and I was painting Ellis's apartment. So Ellis Rabb would come home from a day at work, and say, "Oh, Kelsey," and so this and that. And I thought, wow, this guy is some character. So I started to just kind of record him in my head. He was being socked away, put in the bank, and he said he had been married to Rosemary Harris. And he was kind of beyond any working definition of gay. It was just one of those things that they thought this was going to be a marvelous adventure for the two of them. They both knew what they were sexually and tried it for a while. And Rosemary finally just said, "Yeah, I got to go do something else." And so she married a senator and had a baby. And it just so happened I was working when Rosemary had this baby with Ellis. And Ellis would invite me and say, "Kelsey, why don't you sit and join me for a drink?" And so I would do that. And he would start on this thing. It was almost without exception, and it was repeated every afternoon for about 3 weeks when I worked with him. And he'd say, "Oh, Kelsey, that baby should have been mine." And I thought, that's it. This is the guy. This is when Sam Simon called me and said, "We have this character who's never spoken on the Krusty the Clown show. He's Sideshow Bob." And I first read the script, and he liked Cole Porter, and I suddenly, oh, this is Ellis Rabb. This is the guy. Recently, my wife showed me someone had taken a recording of Ellis doing, I think, the Seagull, Dr. Dorn, I think, and found this archival video of him and mentioned, Kelsey Grammer says he was ripping off Ellis Rabb, and he said, I think it's true. And of course, there was Ellis doing, "Oh dear, oh my," and it is so wonderful that I had that opportunity to know him. I'll tell you another quick story about the first Sideshow Bob appearance. A buddy of mine was a teacher in Illinois, and he called me the day after Sideshow Bob made his first appearance on The Simpsons, and he sent me a picture a couple of days later of one of the fraternity houses that was all red brick, but on it was painted a 40 feet tall picture of Sideshow Bob, and on it was written, "Free Sideshow Bob." So he caught the imagination of the country almost immediately and has stuck through it. I mean, he casts a long shadow through the universe.
Do you remember the direction you received or the note in the script that described that sound?
Nope. They just said he steps on a rake and reacts. So that was.
Who knew?
Who
knew that you,
I know.
the man behind one of the most iconic characters in sitcomery,
Yeah.
would best be known for going, ugh.
I know. It is wild, isn't it? And then, even funnier, in addition to that story, we were auditioning my daughter for Boss, the girl that played my daughter. Now, she didn't end up getting it, but she was close. But this girl at the end of her audition looked at me and said, by the way, I'm that baby. She was Rosemary Harris's daughter. So it was a wonderful sort of full circle thing.
The new Frasier had several episodes directed by James Burrows, who's like almost certainly the greatest sitcom director of all time. And I interviewed James Burrows one time, and I remember trying to get him to be boastful about something.
Ah, that's not his thing, yeah.
Or at least acknowledge that maybe he was good at his job.
Yeah.
And he finally, I remember very vividly, he finally said, well, I think I'm pretty good at coming up with little stuff for people to do.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, that is true. He's got, we were very fortunate. He and I developed a kind of a shorthand that paid off for years. But the most specific examples, we were doing this show called Dinner at 8-ish, I think. It was with BB Newirth, and I had invited Sam and Diane over. This is on Cheers. And he said, Kels, this scene, he said, gotcha.
And he just gave you a hand gesture, like an underneath kind of.
Yeah, it was just fantastic. And it did sort of guide me toward the line reading I did. So this woman was a Circe casting. So silly. But it was, we've always been that way. And of course, when I get to work with Jim, it's fantastic. He's probably the most important person in my life, career-wise, since the beginning.
Are you aware of the move that Frasier does when he's really feeling himself?
I actually am not.
It's like an upper body, like a lengthening, like a...
I'm imagining it's girding his loins. I imagine that's kind of what I'm doing, sort of puffing myself up a little bit. Yeah, well, yeah, you know what? I think when he would go head-to-head with somebody who was challenging him or his son, I think there was evidence of that for sure, like when... There was the spelling bee with Frederick, I think, when he was pretty young. I seem to remember getting pretty puffed up there.
I mean, the thing about Frasier is you have to know innately in some way, maybe it's also intellectual, but innately in some way, the balance of him taking it in the jewels and winning.
Yeah.
Because on paper, this is an insufferable man that sitcom audiences would not want to root for.
Yeah, maybe this is how the character evolved through whatever I brought to it, that he became lovable because of the thing that he loves so deeply and is searching for that. And he is self-aware to the point where he realizes when he's being a bit of a fool and does it anyway. There's this comes from an old experience on stage when I discovered what I call the wink. You have to give the audience a wink that says you're aware of what you're doing as an actor. That invites them in. It invites them in to say, oh, he's being funny. So they need to feel safe enough to be included and be funny. And this is Jamie Burrows, sort of related. His dad, Abe Burrows, did a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. Nobody was laughing. They're going previews. They're opening out of town. They're afraid they're going to close out of town. And somebody said, we got to tell them that it's funny. So they wrote the song Comedy Tonight, which opens the show. Comedy tonight. Yeah, exactly. And that's the necessity of the wink. It's an invitation.
There was a time when the only thing on the entire internet was a video of you falling off the edge of a stage.
Oh, Lord, I remember that. Yeah, that was... Yeah. I remember that there was such celebration of it.
Well, it's an extraordinary video.
It's an extraordinary moment.
I must have I imagine that, well, for one thing, I imagine there was physical pain for you.
Oh, it was extraordinary, yeah. But I think I said, "Oh dear Lord,"
Well,
something like that.
and I think you also like apologize to the person you fall on, if I remember.
Yeah, well, I didn't fall on anybody. I apologized because I had to finish the show.
Right.
I said, "I'm so sorry." I don't remember the specifics of it. But yeah, I still have a bump up near my right buttock, I guess you'd say, that was basically muscle that went from my kneecap up to that place. It's still a little out of shape, out of whack. But the EMT guy that looked at me after I finished the show, they were waiting for me. I went out there. He said, "You look worse than most motorcycle accidents." It was a very unpleasant thing that happened. But what had happened, the reason it happened was, and I did learn this, I walked the stage for rehearsal with house lights on so I could see the stage. When we did the show, it was the first time I saw a spotlight. I couldn't see anything but the fact that I was sort of floating in a dark room and there was silhouetted audience members out there. But the stage itself was built, the thrust was built in a circumference sort of radius that went out to the middle of the stage and then went into stars, points along the way. It was the Aladdin stage, I think. And I fell on I stepped off of the stage and onto one of those points. And that's what cut me. So I said, "Oh, dear Lord," because I didn't want to say, "Oh, F," because there were kids in the audience. But I did remember thinking the thing that kind of killed my grandmother was when she broke her hip. And I thought, "Oh, boy, I might have broken my hip." I didn't.
I mean, I'll say this, Kelsey Grammer. On the one hand, this is a video of a famous, beloved sitcom actor falling, which is in and of itself somewhat appealing to
know,
the
I get
Korean
it.
interest. However, I do not think that video is anything without the part where you say, where your reaction to it is so sweet. I remember seeing it and thinking like, "Oh,
Oh, that's very nice.
oh,
Thanks.
Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah.
You take care of yourself,
But
buddy."
I was just trying to make sure I didn't say something awful.
Well, Kelsey Grammer, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
man.
getting to talk to me. And thanks for your extraordinary work over so many years. It's really added a lot to my life.
It's been an honor. Thank you.